Hi there, I'm Dr. Candace King with the Village Media. Late last month, the Supreme Court handed down its decision in Trump v. Barbara, which ruled that the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause guarantees birthright citizenship. This, in effect, struck down Trump's executive order, which was a major defeat for the administration. However, the fight is not yet over. Trump has already said he's pushing the courts for another rehearing, as well as galvanizing Congress to legislate around the ruling. To help us unpack what this decision means, where it leaves us, and what comes next, I'm joined by Preston Mitchum of Common Cause. Preston is an award-winning Black queer attorney and advocate, and the Senior Director of Legislative Affairs at Common Cause, which is a nonpartisan grassroots organization dedicated to protecting American democracy. For nearly 15 years, he has advocated for marginalized communities through organizations including the Trevor Project, URGE, and Advocates for Youth. He has also taught law and policy courses at Georgetown University and American University. Preston, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So, just to dive right into it, when you first read the court's decision, what stood out to you and what has been significant for this ruling in general?
So, what first stood out for me in terms of the court's decision was I was excited, naturally speaking. We've seen what the Supreme Court has done the past couple of cycles. And admittedly, Candace, it was anticlimactic for me because it shouldn't have been a case in the first place. I think for a lot of people, especially when it comes to these hot button issues, say abortion access or anything related to voting rights, etc., when we know the makeup of the court, I think many of us who work in this space, in these spaces, are usually expecting a gut punch because we know why courts like this, a conservative majority by 6-3 largely, we know what happens with a lot of our cases, especially for progressive issues, so to speak. I was unsurprised by the decision. I think, if I'm being honest, even with that, I was unsurprised because I'm like, as an attorney, certainly they can't find this to violate the 14th Amendment. I would have had to just take away everything, right? My law degree, my licenses, anything you need, take it away because this case was simple, right? The decision reaffirmed one of the Constitution's clearest promises that individuals born in the United States are citizens under the 14th Amendment, right? So while the decision, of course, aligns with longstanding constitutional protections and interpretations, again, the fact that it is even a case really bothered me, disturbed me, and it underscored how important it is to continue educating the public about the history and the purpose of the 14th Amendment and the Citizenship Clause, especially as it applies to Black people and people of color.
Absolutely. And, you're picking up on some threads that we're going next, which is just sort of placing this case in the context of the 14th Amendment and its connection to cases like Dred Scott and also just how the courts were sort of trying to frame rights around Black people who were enslaved during the time that case was being considered. And so if you could just sort of put that in context for folks.
Yeah, gladly, Candace. So it's interesting. Spoiler alert, the Supreme Court never overturned Dred Scott. I think it shocks a lot of people when I say that because, Dred Scott obviously does not apply today, but it's only because of the ratification of the 14th Amendment in 1868, right? This was the aftermath of the Civil War. Its Citizenship Clause in particular was drafted specifically to overturn the Supreme Court's infamous, as you've noted, Dred Scott decision, which declared that Black people could never, and I mean could never, be citizens of the United States, right? Because we were property. We were the jurisdiction of our owners, our masters, if you will, and therefore not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. The Citizenship Clause, the 14th Amendment that was ratified, changed that. And so the amendment, really established a constitutional principle. Very straightforward, quite frankly. And I stated it a little earlier, but it bears repeating that if you are born in the United States, and you're subject to its jurisdiction, you are a citizen. That's it. It doesn't necessarily matter if your parent has citizenship status. It doesn't matter if they came here unlawfully. What matters is you were born in the United States and you're a citizen. And so this removed, right, citizenship from the realm of race. It removed it from the realm of political preference or ancestry. It rooted it firmly in the Constitution. And so for Common Cause, and really for me, right, at its core, the 14th Amendment is really America's effort to correct one of the greatest constitutional failures by ensuring that citizenship is something that was clean cut, understood, and something that we all could understand what it meant. And you could not be denied citizenship based on your identity. And so it really tried to course correct itself there.
Yeah, thank you so much for teasing that out. And, I know that your organization, for which you are the Senior Director of Legislative Affairs, Common Cause, you all joined in the amicus brief, which urged the court to protect birthright citizenship. So, can you talk to us a little bit about that amicus brief and why it was so important for Common Cause to be involved in in this particular case?
Yeah, so I need to go back a little bit, right? Like how we even got to this in the first place was that, Trump's first day back in office during Trump 2.0, for January 20th of 2025, Trump sent an executive order that essentially directed all these agencies to say that, push back on people ultimately in layman's terms if they are not, if their parents, their mothers, their fathers are either here unlawfully, they were not born here. So really challenge the like younger people's babies etc status of a citizenship based on their parents, and that's not really what the constitution had established. And so obviously that's ultimately what the Supreme Court overturned. They overturned the executive order. So Common Cause joined Demos and Campaign Legal Center to file an amicus brief because we knew already that this case was deeper than immigration. So to be clear, it is about immigration, but it's about so much more. It's really about democracy and democratic equality and who belongs in the political community. And we really had a conversation on a couple of things. One, birthright citizenship is foundational to democracy. I've addressed this, but the 14th Amendment, it was made to course correct some of the harms and errors of Dred Scott decision, but really the pushing back on Black people. So Black people could not build a political class, could not build economic power, could not even build physical or personal power, really wanting to push back on Black people being seen as equal to our counterparts. And so the 14th Amendment deliberately rejected those systems that tied citizenship to ancestry, to race, to social class following the Civil War. Two, the EO created a hierarchy, right? They created a caste system that was really based on what things were hereditary. So by making citizenship dependent on your parents' immigration status, the order would establish inherent legal classes. And the reality is, we should have minced words. Trump was doing it because he thinks this country is becoming too Black and brown. He said it a number of times. His allies have said it a number of times. His white supremacist besties have said it repeatedly. They deeply believe that they are actively being wiped off this face, despite what we know to be true, right? About like everything that many of them have not earned and all the ways that they're pulling back on marginalized communities. And we also understood that citizenship protects political participation. Despite what the court has attempted to do, right, in Calais and other decisions that actually impact voting rights and ensuring that people are being suppressed by their vote, all the redistricting efforts, we know the purpose is really what undergirds that is to ensure that people of color cannot be a part of political systems and politically participate. And that's especially true for what's happening to Black and Latino communities. One of the last things I'll say is, we also understood within our amicus brief that citizenship affects access to essential public benefits and protections. And so we emphasize that citizenship determines eligibility for numerous government programs and access to services. And so, there are a number more reasons why we filed an amicus brief. But again, the TLDR, the short line is, we fully understood that this was about immigration and democracy. This was about immigration, democracy, and democratic participation.
Thank you so much for breaking that down so clearly, and definitely agree there with those points that you raised. As you know, the decision came out late last month, and now 47 is saying that he's asking the court to rehear the case. Any thoughts there? What, even if they don't go through with it, what do you make of just the suggestion of bringing that to them?
I mean, it proves that Trump does not like losing. Trump sees himself as a winner. He sees himself as the best power money can buy. And he wants to ensure that his legacy is rooted in hatred. His legacy is rooted in reifying white supremacist values and norms and traditions of what he considers to be America. But for what many of us and our parents and our grandparents and our great greats have actively worked to make sure that there's a space for us all, especially Black people of all walks and positions of life. And so Trump does not like that. He does not value it. He doesn't see the credit being deserved to us and our people for building this country to what it is today, even with minimal regard to our contributions. And so we'll be actively fighting regardless, one way or another, if this case does make its way back to lower courts, it makes its way again differently to the Supreme Court. We'll make sure that we're actively fighting against that. But what it shows me is Trump is a sore loser. He doesn't like losing. He also doesn't really understand the Constitution. And only someone like that who has that much hubris and that much egomaniacal attitudes would not stop.
Uh, I mean, so well said. And my final question for you today is, what should people take away from this case? As you were mentioning about Common Cause and why you all filed this amicus brief, it was much more than immigration. It was about, who gets to belong and citizenship. And so, what should people take away from this case? And then also, you mentioned a little bit of it in the previous response, but what else is Common Cause sort of working towards, this year, especially as, midterms are coming up in November?
Oh my goodness, thank you. So, I wasn't going to bring up this person's name, but since he wrote such a scathing dissent here, I would say, what people can take away is Justice Thomas will still be Justice Thomas at the end of the day. And, his position, which is so fascinating, especially if you read Justice Jackson's concurring opinion, and she wrote her concurring opinion just to talk about him and about his dissent, because his dissenting opinion was effectively the purpose of the citizenship clause to protect Black people after the Civil War, to make sure that Black people actually had recognition and rights and citizenship under the 14th Amendment. And there's some truth there, to be clear. And so, a broken clock is certainly, going to be right twice. The problem, as Justice Jackson points out, is one, it's actually not historically that true. Many Black people who did fight for their citizenship for Black people actually saw the issue as broader and deeper and more connected to people of color, even though obviously, like, the direct result is Black people got citizenship, right? It overturns Red Scott. But Justice Jackson said this is actually not rooted in Black political agendas. It's actually not rooted in what we know to be true around Black people and everything that we fought for in our nation's leadership. She also then said, how ironic is it of you to say that this is about race when you fought so hard to say the Constitution should be colorblind? And so she called out the hypocrisy in his dissenting opinion because all of it was saying, Black, 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 this is for Black people. The Constitution and the 14th Amendment was for Black people. And she was like, interesting you say that. Because all these other decisions that came down, you never suggested that. You always said this is colorblind. So I always want people to take away that Justice Thomas will be Justice Thomas. And I know for a fact, my fraternity brother, Justice Thurgood Marshall, is rolling over in his grave that he was his next Black replacement. Interesting enough. I also want people to take away that, frankly, the 14th Amendment, it just represents one of America's promise. And that promise is that, we are subject to the jurisdiction, sometimes regrettably so, of the United States. And you can't take that away just because you have a different opinion about that. It's not a simple issue of constitutional interpretation. It is an issue that Trump and his allies are absolutely wrong here. It is clear what the Constitution says. And as people who consider themselves strict interpretationists, it's interesting to me that in something that's so clear in the Constitution, they're trying to provide a loose interpretation to. And Common Cause knows this. We work in 4 pillars across the country. And our work is really centered in voting and fair representation, civil rights and civil liberties, anti-corruption and accountability in media and technology. So we're working especially in the South because we know all roads lead to the South, but especially all over the country around redistricting efforts and what that looks like, and not to suppress votes from Black and Latino people. We're also actively working in the country on pushing back against FISA. Which is like international surveillance that was meant to actually push back and monitor what's happening internationally. But we know what's true today, especially, is that it impacts Americans domestically. So we're making sure that Congress cannot reauthorize FISA without some real reforms. Like you can't just take someone's privacy and private information without a warrant. Right? Like, and there's this thing called the data broker loophole we're working to close. We're also pushing back on Todd Blanche, who is the acting attorney general, and we're pushing back against his confirmation that actually takes place July 15th and 16th. We're saying he could not be confirmed as the next attorney general in this country because he is Trump's personal attorney. He's a loyalist to Trump, and that is not the purpose of the Department of Justice. We're actively also pushing back on the slush fund and the immunity deal, where Trump is essentially attempting to line his pockets and his friends and allies' pockets. So we're actively working to restore America's promise of democracy every single day. And believe it or not, that's just a little bit about the work that we're currently doing.
Well, that is certainly very urgent work, Preston. Thank you so much for your time today and also for really breaking down the birthright citizenship case for us and those insights on the 14th Amendment specifically as it relates to Black communities. This was really insightful, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Candace. Such a pleasure.